Hi, and welcome back to the 10th episode of the Pathfinders podcast. Today's episode features an interview with Dr Andrew Jenkinson, who is a consultant, a surgeon at the prestigious University College London Hospital, and a weight loss researcher and expert. Dr Andrew Jenkinson has a new book out called Why We Eat Too Much, and this explores the world of dieting, weight loss, and how a lot of what we have been taught isn't necessarily true. The book is backed up by a lot of research and science, and this was a topic I was extremely fascinated to learn more about. This interview explores why most people fail to diet, the sugar and fat industry war that took place, the importance of our metabolism and insulin, and most importantly, what a weight anchor is, how we all have them, and why this could be the key to controlling our weight. Before we get into today's issue, if you would like to support the podcast, then the best way to do so is by visiting the 99% Lifestyle store. We have 6 publications out now, and they all share stories, work, and thoughts from the world's leading professionals and creatives. It's a bit similar to what we do on the podcast, but each magazine has around 20 different creatives inside, and each article features a new creative and a different topic. There was only 1,000 to 3,000 issues of each publication printed, and Volume 3 now looks like it will soon sell out. There are only 15 copies left of Volume 3, and once that sells out, we won't be printing anymore. So if you would like to grab a copy of Volume 3, then do so whilst you can. Now, let's get into today's episode with Dr. Andrew Jenkinson.
So my name's Andrew Jenkinson, and I'm a bariatric surgeon who does weight loss surgery at UCLH. And I wrote the book, which is a Sunday Times bestseller, called Why We Eat Too Much, The New Science of Appetite, which looks into the reason people can't sustain weight loss.
Yeah, brilliant. And could you tell me a bit more about your early life, like how you got into this field of work?
So I scraped into medical school with the minimal grades. Went to Southampton Medical School, had a great time there, and then decided I wanted to become a surgeon. My first experience of the operating theatre was fantastic. I remember the bright lights shining on. We were operating on someone's groin. It was an old-fashioned varicose vein operation, and the sort of iodine on the skin, and then the green drapes around it, and the bright lights. And I remember when the surgeon took out his shiny scalpel, shine reflected on the light, and cut into the groin, and all the blood started coming out. Just as I was thinking, yeah, this is what I want to do. My colleague, my friend, Sodi, who's a big Sikh guy, just collapsed and fell over all into the tubing. That was my first experience of theatre. He became a psychiatrist, and I said, yeah, I want to do surgery. So, yeah, I remember that one forever.
Mm. And where was it you became interested in the whole aspect of weight loss and people being healthy with their bodies in terms of weight? How did that start?
So really that was something, sometimes life just unfolds and you get exposed to these things. I had no interest in, dieting and healthy eating at all. I happen to be from a family that doesn't suffer with obesity, so I've never been interested in diets and things. But obviously I was a surgeon and I was operating on stomachs, doing some cancer surgery. And then a job came up in East London at the Homerton Hospital as a consultant, where they did weight loss surgery. So I took that job because it was with some good colleagues that I got on with, and learned how to do weight loss surgery, which technically is, at first quite difficult, but I got through the learning curve and was able to do it quite well. So I was then exposed to a lot of people who had been dieting and failing to lose weight for many, many, many years. And that's what then sort of piqued my interest of, why are these people who should be able to do something pretty simple, just eat a little bit less food and exercise a bit more, why are they asking me to do something so drastic as take their stomach out? So I thought the sort of two didn't really add up, and they had very, very similar stories, these patients. So I thought that maybe there was something that the medical profession and, our mainstream understanding of dieting and exercise, maybe we weren't sort of understanding it properly. So that, really interested me that, there was this big disease that was affecting a quarter of our population. and maybe we didn't really understand it properly. So yeah, that sort of stimulated my interest to go and hit the books, look at the research, and put that together with people's real time, real world experience of how difficult it is. We can all lose a bit of weight by starving ourselves, but actually, in a year or 2 years, can you actually totally readjust your weight by a significant amount? It's really, really difficult, almost impossible, by conventional methods.
Yeah, and you've kind of answered my next question already regarding the your book, Why We Eat Too Much: The New Science of Appetite. And I wanted to know a bit more about how that book came about. Did you always have this idea that, okay, after I've done this work, I would love to share this in a book and publish a book?
Uh, so basically, I was doing a lot of research into this question: why can't people lose weight? Why do they have to come to bariatric surgery? And it was sort of all coming together as a really sort of eloquent explanation. Basically, the theory of the book is that calories are this secondary thing, the energy that we take in as a secondary. The main thing that's in charge of our body is our hormones, and our hypothalamus, our brain will fix our weight to a particular point. So when this was all coming together, I started to do lectures to GPs, and many of them came to me and said, "Oh, you need to write a book on this." So that's when I sort of thought about, yeah, okay, maybe write a book. I then requested a year sabbatical from the NHS. So I took a year off, and I was sort of with the reason to write a book. So I was sort of then cornered. I had the time off, so I had to do it. It's actually really difficult to write a book, but and I can't believe I did it. I was never a big English person at school, but yeah, it's one of those things when you have a burning question. It didn't feel like work. It felt like really interesting.
Mm. And what is it that people can expect to learn from this book? Is there also, I suppose, actionable advice in there that people can apply to their own lives after learning some of this information that you just spoke about?
Yeah, so I sort of wanted to write the book just on how the body works, how our metabolisms, adjust to whether we're overeating or undereating, and then a little bit of history about the history of food and why we find ourselves in a situation where we're surrounded by processed foods, basically. Um, and I submitted that to Penguin, the publishers, but they said, "Well, look, we sort of want some readers will want a little bit of advice." So I then went back and we did part 3 of the book, which does give practical advice on what to do to reset your weight. So the whole thesis of the book, I'm sure you're going to ask me, is about the weight set point. So every individual has their own specific weight that their body wants them to be, and their body's going to fight, with everything to try and keep them at that weight or get them back to that weight. Part 3 of the book looks at how you can adjust that weight setting. If it's too high, adjust it down by lifestyle and some dietary measures.
Mm.
And you get
And
long-term weight loss without any effort.
and I think is it referred to as a weight anchor? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different terms for it. But I think a good analogy is like a weight anchor. So basically, you're sort of moored at that weight, and you can sort of you can imagine that's your weight setting, your weight anchor, and it's almost like you've got a elasticated rope tied to that weight anchor, and the further you try and diet yourself away from it, the stronger the pull back to it. And that pullback is to do with our metabolism. So that's the amount of energy we use up even before we move. So this is heating our bodies, chemical reactions, breathing, heartbeat, that sort of thing. It actually takes up most of our energy. 70% of our energy is taken up even before we move. And that can adjust, up and down by up to 700 kilocalories between people of similar sizes per day. So you sort of, this is more than a 10K run or like quite a big, 2-3 course meal, 700 kilocalories a day. You're fighting against that. Your body can adjust that and just say, okay, you're dieting, you're taking 700 kilocalories off. We're going to just adjust to that. We're going to adapt our body because you're not eating as much, because we don't want, the body's control system doesn't want to lose much weight. So you get these people that I've seen who maybe they were really obese, maybe 25 stone, they get down towards 20 stone with, some extreme diet, but they're still on 1,000 or 1,200 kilocalories and they're stuck at 20 stone. And and the GP won't understand metabolic regulation and will say, well, you must be cheating. But actually, if you understand metabolic regulation, yeah, they are complying to the diet. Around 1,200 kilocalories a day, and they're 20 stone and they're stuck. And not only are they stuck, but actually they have the terrible side effects of the diet, such as, real lassitude and tiredness combined with massive hunger and food-seeking behavior. And almost, the further away you get from your set point, it can almost be, it takes over your life thinking about food. And the book, mentions the Minnesota starvation experiments, which looked at what happens when you starve volunteer humans, and what happens to their psychological, focus and well-being. So yeah, it's pretty hard to lose weight and sustain weight loss if your weight is set to a higher level than it actually is at that time.
And is it genetics that initially sets that weight anchor? Is it something inherited from, say, your parents?
Yeah, so it's a combination of genetics and environment. There's another thing called epigenetics, which I sort of won't get into, but that's mentioned in the book, which is quite a new emerging area where, the genes actually change slightly. So we think we just inherit our sort of genes for our height and our eye color from our parents. But actually, there's a lot of other things, and a lot of other genes, such as your appetite, your metabolism, your propensity to diabetes, this sort of thing. They can be changed slightly depending on, the conditions that your mother was in when you were in the womb. It's almost like it's described as like a marinade of the genes to try and, predict a future environment. So that's epigenetics, but I don't want to get any more into that. It's quite complicated, but very, very interesting. So yeah, it's genetics and environment. Genetics probably make up 70-75% of the predisposition to whether you're going to struggle or not with your weight. So if you're from a family that suffer with obesity, it's much more likely you're going to suffer as well. But the whole point of the book is you can have those genes, but they're only triggered, the weight gain is only triggered when you're exposed to a sort of Western type diet and lifestyle. And yeah, there's been a lot of studies proving that, genetics account for a significant amount of where your weight's going to be. So there was many different countries who've got these sets of identical twins in databases, and they're really interesting to study because there's two people with absolutely identical genetic makeup. And certainly UK study, Jane Wardle, one of the researchers at UCLH, looked at 300 pairs of identical twins that had been adopted and brought up in different home environments. Then she looked at them about 30 years down the line when they were adults and found that there was a 75% concordance with their weight. So just as you would expect them to be the same height, because they're identical twins, they're actually quite similar size. Some of them skinny pair, some of them overweight, some of them obese, despite being brought up in different home environments.
And if we have this weight point and it's something that you inherit, is there a way to alter that at all? And does that, say, change as you gradually get older as well?
Yeah, so as I sort of mentioned, so you've got that genetic predisposition to gain weight in the when you're exposed to a westernized, industrialized, processed diet. But if you take that diet away, then it's likely your weight set point is going to reduce again. Probably if you've got obese genes or overweight genes or heavy bones, as the old-fashioned word was, it's unlikely you're going to get to size 6 or 8 if you're a woman, or skinny if you're a guy. But you can certainly get down towards normal weight if you go back to eating a more traditional diet.
And do you think this is why, one of the big reasons is why most people do fail diets, because I suppose this lack of knowledge about this research that you've done?
Yeah, it is, and it's because the the understanding of weight loss is too simplified. So it really is, I mean, it's the first law of thermodynamics. It does, you can't deny it. The fact that if you put energy into a system um, and take some out, it's the difference between the two is going to be stored. Okay, so that sort of, you can't argue with that. That's there. But the issue is that our metabolism, the amount of energy that we burn, is not under our conscious control. That's under control of our weight control center and our hypothalamus. And it is really powerful. And not only that, not just the amount that we burn, but also, our food seeking behavior, which, so actually the drive to take calories in is not, it's under subconscious control, and it can't be controlled by us. And these hormones are, they're pretty strong. They're as strong as the thirst hormones. So it's a little bit, I mean, another maybe sort of slightly cheeky analogy would be, okay, if you want to lose, 2 kilograms, why don't you stop drinking water? And yeah, you can probably lose 2 kilograms by stop drinking water for for a couple of days. But you're going to get an absolute parched thirst, and it's going to take over your thoughts, and you're not going to produce any urine at all. And eventually you're going to drink and get back to your fluid weight setting. In a similar way, yeah, you can, in the short term, alter the amount of energy that you want on board, the amount of fat that you want on board, but in the longer term, the body's going to take control and say, I'm sorry, you have to eat now, and we're not going to burn any energy until we have eaten. So it's similar to those systems. So we do have, it's a little more complicated than just, yeah, we can just go down to the gym and go on a diet. As I say, yeah, short term, 2-3 weeks, you can probably cope and lose a little bit, but you're going to put it back on.
So what is the main areas people should be focusing on then? Is it, if there is a lot of this information they've just consumed is talking about a lot of genetics tied into it, and the weight anchor and metabolism and things like that?
So you have to look at what sort of determines the weight setting, or the weight anchor. And in people who go along life with a relatively stable weight for years and decades, they have a hormone from their fat cells that is working to maintain a specific weight for them, and this hormone is called leptin. And we need to understand this hormone before we can understand, what we can do in a diet to help that work. So yeah, leptin comes from fat cells. The more fat you have, the higher the level of leptin in your blood. Okay, so it just comes, the more fat you have, the higher the leptin level. And the level of leptin is read by, again, the hypothalamus in your brain, which controls your weight. And it's sort of like it will understand, yeah, we've got enough energy on board, to withstand 2 months of not eating, we're okay. Or 1 month of not eating, we're okay. Or we don't have enough energy, we've only got a couple of days supply. So the leptin signal is telling the hypothalamus, what the current state of energy supply in the body is. When we eat particular types of food or have particular types of stresses, that leptin signal gets diluted and obscured. So, for instance, when you get to a point of a specific point of obesity, it really does start to go wrong. The feedback system, the body telling us how much energy we have, and that's regulating the amount of food we eat, it starts to go wrong. It's called leptin resistance, and the further you get into obesity, the more obese you get, the more difficult it gets, because the leptin is, even though the leptin level in your blood is sky high because you've got a lot of fat and energy on board, it's not being seen by the hypothalamus. So you get this situation where most people who are really suffering with obesity will regularly binge eat on rubbish, and they will blame themselves. and think they're like, an addictive, weak-willed person. And they will usually do the binge eating in private because it's embarrassing. But that binge eating is driven by this, this the fact that leptin is obscured in the hypothalamus, and they're getting signals that they're starving to death because the hypothalamus can't see the leptin anymore. It's like, we have to eat, we have a voracious appetite. So this is the total breakdown in the messaging system that occurs in obese people. Now, one of the main things in the diet that starts to block leptin is insulin. So when we have a population who are given going from traditional foods to a Western type food, where there is a lot more sugar and a lot more refined carbohydrate, like wheat. So bread, pasta, cakes, biscuits, sweet drinks. If we supply a population that type of food, the average insulin level of that population will increase. And insulin, acts to it vies with leptin for signaling. So it signals in the same place. So the more insulin you have on board, the less the leptin is going to get read. So if you give a population sugar and refined carbohydrates, some of that population, their weight setting is going to go higher because the leptin isn't being read. And as the book discusses, this is what farmers do to cows to fatten them up. They give them a grain and actually fat feed, and they will find that actually if they change the food from natural foods to these sort of processed type foods, the herd's going to get bigger faster. So you can't turn around and blame obese people for being obese, when it's the food, the quality of the food that they're eating is the thing that's changing their hormonal feedback mechanism and making it go wrong. So this is why we have like a real misunderstanding of an obesity crisis.
And
so the first thing that we can do, and that is in part 3 of the book, and it's common sense and we know it works anyway, but now we know why it works. If you give up sugar and you give up bread and refined carbohydrates, you don't lose weight because you're taking in less calories. You lose weight because your insulin signal is less and your body can see leptin. It can see, actually, whoa, you've got too much energy on board, like let's calm down the appetite and increase the metabolism. And this is what happens. So when people who are almost artificially obese because they have so much sugar and refined carbohydrate and they give it up, they just lose weight without any effort at all. No hunger, nothing. So that's the first part of the book, as far as the advice is concerned, to try and give up or reduce sugar and refined carbohydrates.
And another aspect to that, I know that the book uses this example of the Inuit Eskimos, and it looks about how fat, that they're on a high fat diet but they've got low levels of obesity. And I know as a society we see fat as almost like a bad thing, and I suppose the enemy initially, and that's not the case, and that's something you've spoke about as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's the Inuit Eskimos and the Maasai warriors in Kenya have basically a diet of fat and meat. So it's a carnivorous diet, basically. So I think the Eskimos just eat, mainly whale blubber, whale fat. They have very low rates of obesity and cardiovascular disease. But we in our sort of scientific circles and just generally in Western society have been fed a lot of research over the years and a lot of news reports linking saturated fats, so a juicy steak or too much cheese or too many eggs, with cardiac disease and obesity. So if you have too much fat, it's going to clog up your blood vessels, and also it's got too many calories in, and you should avoid it. And this is ingrained in most people living in Western societies. They're really scared of natural saturated fat and dairy products. So butter's making a comeback now because people are realizing actually it's not quite as bad as people think. But butter was demonized, 10, 15 years ago even. Hardly anyone bought butter. the book goes back on the history of that research, and it all sort of originated from this, big scientific debate in the late 60s when there was a real rise in cardiovascular disease in America. It sort of transpired that that rise was because everyone was smoking a lot more, and it was like post-war, and that was coming through. But at the time, they wondered whether it was something in the diet, and there were two scientific camps. One was saying sugar caused cardiovascular disease, and one was saying saturated fat. And the sort of research and the debate went on for years, and was eventually sort of won by the fat lobbies, won by the sugar lobby, actually proving that fat caused cardiovascular disease, by actually research that's subsequently been proven to be, slightly fraudulent. Certainly, selection bias would be what I would describe, cherry picking results and just putting it in to go with a specific conclusion that you want. So there was a lot of industry drive from the sugar industry, funding research, demonizing fat because sugar industry didn't want sugar to be demonized. And this was then perpetuated, and more recently has been perpetuated by the statin industry, which is a like $3 billion a year industry. So it's a massively profitable industry, trying to link, perception that cholesterol specifically is a marker for cardiovascular disease. It's a really, really weak marker. You've got to look at, and again, this is explained, with some good analogies in the book to make it understandable. Cholesterol, total cholesterol level is it's almost worthless unless you have a hereditary high cholesterol, like 1 in 500 people have proper high cholesterol from a familial perspective. But if you just look at cholesterol, you're not going to get a very good marker of cardiac risk. You need to look at the subunits of cholesterol, so high density, so the big cholesterol and small cholesterol, low density. And then the small cholesterol is in type A and type B, and there's only one particular small particle that gives you a cardiac risk. So there's a whole smoke screen put up by the statin industry to try and perpetuate our, and GPs understanding that cholesterol causes cardiac disease, and therefore we need to give statins for it. It's actually, I'm extremely cynical about it. Statins work as an anti-inflammatory tool. Statins do decrease your risk of cardiac events. They work, we know that, but they don't work by reducing cholesterol. That's just a side effect of the drug. They work because they're anti-inflammatory drugs. So and going back to, why does this relate to obesity? Well, the governments in the 80s told the population and the food industry to take saturated fat away from them. Decreased saturated fat is going to kill you. And people started eating sugar and refined carbohydrates and grains instead. And then that perfectly coincided with the rise in obesity starting in the early 80s, was our demonization of saturated fat. So the book sets out the history of all this. I think it's pretty interesting. We keep it pretty light and just really interesting. But basically, a lot of people really struggle with going lowish carb, which is going to help your weight set point, because there's nothing else to eat. Is it just protein? But if you embrace natural saturated fat, so we're talking about dairy products and meat. If you do eat meat, if you embrace that, then actually that new way of eating really good food, lowish carb, not massive amounts of potatoes or rice, fill up the plate with fat and protein instead, and vegetables. If you can do that, then the new way of eating is actually quite enjoyable and filling. When I talk about saturated fat, again, some of the research has been obscured by the fact that they've put palm oil, which is a saturated fat, but it's really processed, totally processed, and it has a really nice feel about it, and it's really good for cooking cakes. So it's in all processed cakes and things. And some of the research linking saturated fat to cardiac disease has included that in its research. So palm oil is bad for you, but that has muddied the waters as far as, proper natural dairy products and, red meat.
Mm. And I've got two questions on the back of the answer, so I might backtrack a little bit depending on your answer. But does this necessarily mean that there is a big miscommunication and I suppose misinformation issue where you've got these different industries feeding you messages? You might have like the dieting industry saying you need to diet, the government's giving you one message, and then also you've got these big industries also like the sugar industry, which I'm guessing are still have us saying things, feeding us all these mixed messages.
Yeah, I agree. I think industry, there's a lot of industries that survive on the old myth that it is people's fault that they're obese, and if they pulled themselves together and went on a diet and went down the gym, the population would suddenly be better. And basically, they're saying the obesity crisis is like a sudden weak-willedness of the population, and they want to perpetuate that myth that actually it's not the food, it's actually people's willpower that is causing this problem. So we're talking about the gym industry, which is fantastically massive on the back of the fact that everyone's struggling to maintain their weight. So they're making massive profits from the fact that the obesity crisis. Obviously, the food industry are making massive profits. These foods are hedonic. They're like addictive. They're like manufactured and researched in laboratories, food laboratories, to get to a specific perfect point of hedonic pleasure for particular types of food. They're researched like new drugs, basically. So the food industry massively, they want that perpetuated. That it's like it's the person's fault that they're suffering with obesity. And finally, the pharmaceutical industry. A lot of Western, actually, most Western and developing country diseases are caused by the change in the diet in the last 30, 40 years. So both obesity, which causes type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, sleep apnea, increasing risk of cancer, all these things, but also inflammatory conditions, which is sort of mentioned slightly in the book. So things like inflammatory bowel disease and some autoimmune type diseases like asthma, all of those are contributed to by a Western diet. So the pharmaceutical industry as well. I don't think there's a deliberate effort. I don't think people have sort of thought this through and thought, okay, yeah, we know what's really going on, but we want to like obscure it. But it's the self-interest is to carry on the status quo and not really look into it too deeply. Maybe I'm being cynical, and maybe that's just the way I see it. I certainly had some dealings with the food industry, and they want to look like they're helping, but actually, the main thing is they're companies. They need to make a profit. So yeah, this is the whole problem with, in a way, it's an existential problem of sort of capitalism. Is governments are there to protect the health of the people. We've seen this in the COVID crisis. They've done a fantastic job. They've put a lot of resources and massive amounts of money into protecting the population. But they haven't done that for the obesity crisis, and it's because my sort of cynical view is that the food lobbyists are very powerful, and they want to perpetuate the myth that it's not the type of food that the population is given that causes this terrible health crisis, but the weak-willedness and laziness of that population. And the thing is, the industries they can employ really clever scientists and very persuasive lobbyists, and they've got a lot of money. So this is almost like the failure of the way our society works a little bit. I don't know. I'm very cynical about that.
No. That's it. I find it really fascinating, really interesting to hear you talk about all that, because it is quite eye opening and shocking when you do kind of understand it and are made more aware of the facts. And just before we tie things up, I just wanted to also talk about another element that I know the book looks at, and it's that whole environmental factors, which I know you spoke about previously. But I just wanted to know a bit more about this and how the environment can really affect our bodies in these situations where it's, for instance, not talking about what we consume, just more the environmental factor.
Yeah, so there's a chapter in the book which looks at particular times that stimulate people to suddenly gain weight, particular times in life. And these times are really scary. So these are people who, they've gone through maybe the first 20, 25, 30 years of their life, not really worrying about their weight. Their leptin is working, it's the body recognizes how much fat they've got on board and just is able to self-regulate subconsciously. And then something happens in their life and suddenly their weight starts to go up. They start to get worried about it. They start dieting and their weight just goes up and up and up. And it becomes really scary because suddenly their weight isn't under their control anymore. And the particular times in life mentioned in the book. So the first one is leaving home, maybe going to university or like going to a job elsewhere. Other times are getting married, doing night shifts, migrating to a different country. All of these things for particular reasons mentioned in the book make your weight set point go upwards. Example would be leaving home. That will increase your, so going to university, whatever, college. That's been proven to increase, people's weight, students' weight setting. So a lot of students will put on like half a stone, 5 kilograms or something. Occasionally it'll get, even more. And it's traditionally been blamed on, they're drinking too much alcohol. Actually, the research out there suggests that it's an increase in cortisol secretion. So this is the stress hormone. If I was to start treating you, Connor, with cortisol, and you had a stable weight beforehand, in 2 months you're going to be a stone heavier. Doesn't matter what you try, you're going to be, your body's just going to be, want to be heavier. So cortisol works in the same way via stress, not via being administered to someone. So if you have a situation in life where your cortisol level goes up, you just want to eat more. The body wants to store more energy because it's scared that something's happened. And if you go back to hunter-gatherer times, caveman times, this is probably, a really good survival mechanism. If you're setting off on a long migration or something stressful is happening, it's probably quite good that your weight setting is like notched upwards. Yeah, you're going to go out and look for more food, get more calories on board because something is happening that's scaring you. So yeah, that's, just one of the particular areas looked at where suddenly you get runaway weight gain. And what happens with these people is they put on the stone and they think, oh God, I've got to get back to where I was before. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go on a diet and restrict calories, and they do lose a bit of weight, but then, the body adapts to that. Then when they put the weight back on, their weight setting is higher than it was before the diet. And this is something that is so consistent amongst all these people that I've spoken to who recurrently diet. They put the weight back on and more. And again, you go back to why is that? And again, you go back to maybe hunter-gatherer times when we were developing as humans, and food wasn't, there all the time. So if you have a situation where food was abundant, but suddenly there is a famine and people lose weight, and then it becomes abundant again, then, that's fed into the database of your brain to say, well, hang on, yeah, I think maybe we need a little bit more energy on board in case there's a famine next time. And this is where the weight setting or your weight goes even higher after you come off a diet, because you've given the brain that data. Okay, we're in an environment where every 6 months there seems to be some really weird, like 2-3 weeks of not eating anything or not eating much. And this is how the body interprets diet, as a famine.
And I've only got a couple more questions to ask you. And the first is, after people have listened to this podcast and all this information and picked up the book, and what food should they try and eat and incorporate more into their diet? Is it what a lot of people know in just healthy vegetables, less carbs, less sugar, things like that.
Yeah, so it's sort of set out in a book that you should eat. I think I say that if you got your food from the equivalent of the old-fashioned greengrocers, butchers, and fishmongers, so if you eat just vegetables, meat, fish, and dairy products mostly, and you cook the food and you have 2 or 3 good meals a day and you don't avoid saturated fat, then your weight setting will come down over the long term. The last bit of the book talks about, so you do that, so you get rid of carbs, you get rid of wheat if you can. There is a section from a psychologist who I work with, Jackie, talking about, how actually, because a lot of people, it's like giving up sugar is like giving up cigarettes or alcohol. It's like it does have a hedonic attachment to us, so it has an addictive drive. So there is a small section in the book on how to cope with those, those cravings. But if you can give up the sugar and the wheat, go back towards natural foods and cook it, your weight will come down. And then the final part of the chapter looks at then starting to address your total carbohydrate, your total sugar content in the natural foods, so your potatoes and rice and stuff like that, and trying to get that down from an average of like 300 grams of sugar that we normally eat per day down towards 100. And then maybe if you can, depending on if you exercise or not, getting it down to 80 and 60. And all of those things are going to reduce your weight setting. So you have a lowish carb, not so low that you feel terrible, but a lowish carb diet that you just get used to. And natural foods, in the longer term, your weight setting is going to go down. And without going on any diet, you're just going to lose weight. And without calorie counting, you're going to lose weight. So that's the sort of dietary side of things. And it talks a little bit about, de-stressing, decreasing your cortisol level and sleeping well as well. Which again, you get some people that are so stressed. I've had people who even have done bariatric surgery on, so I've removed 2/3 of their stomach, and they're still, intransigent to losing weight despite, not eating hardly anything. But you can tell they're very stressed. They can't stop talking. They've got a stressful job, whatever. And it's because this cortisol is within them. It's keeping hold of their weight. Their body is in a battle. It doesn't want them to lose that energy because they're, intrinsically, subconsciously scared something's going on. They're stressed. So yeah, cortisol is really, really important. You've got to try and relax and change the way you eat, and then the weight will just readjust downwards. I've got many colleagues and friends and acquaintances that I've tried this just change in eating, and it's fantastic. It's like, okay, I was struggling for so long before. I'm okay now. I'm back to normal weight.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating. And if people after listen to this would like to get a copy of your book, where's the best place? Is it via your website or Amazon, or where's best for you?
Amazon's taken over the world, but it seems to be quite easy to get it on Amazon. But also the website, either my website, just Google my name, Andrew Jenkinson. I think it's andrewjenkinson.com actually. You can do it via there. Actually, no, that link goes through to Amazon as well. So, but all good bookshops, including Tesco's, apparently. So enjoy.
I hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode with Dr. Andrew Jenkinson. This podcast is now available on YouTube and all major podcast platforms. If you would like to follow us on social media or find the links to other platforms this podcast is on, then all the links can be found in the description of this episode or on the 99% Lifestyle website. At the end of each interview I conduct, I ask the interviewee to give me 5 recommendations for our audience. This can be from books you should read, musicians you haven't heard of before, podcasts you should listen to, or other creatives and professionals you should follow the work of. These recommendations are sent out as a free newsletter each and every week to the 99% Lifestyle newsletter subscribers. At the time of recording this, we have published 170 issues of the newsletter, and all of the issues are archived and can be read on the website. We have this massive curated collection of recommendations over there now. If you would like to read Andrew's recommendations, then head over to the 99% Lifestyle website, which is 99percentlifestyle.com, and sign up, as his issue will be sent out in the near future. By signing up, it's also the best way to keep updated with everything going on with this podcast and 99% Lifestyle. Thank you again for listening to today's episode. We'll be back very soon with episode 11.